The sky had already begun to settle into dusk by the time I pulled my rental sedan off the highway into a narrow side road that led to the property. The weather had held off so far, dry, cool November air, but the forest around me exhaled cold breath anyway. The house stood back from the road, its lights dim, the driveway unpaved and rubbing under my tires with a gravel crunch. I felt a slow tightening in my chest. Making the booking had seemed fun. A 2-night weekend getaway away from the city, someplace remote, peaceful, off the grid, as the listing said. The listing photos had shown cozy interiors, warm wood beams, a stone fireplace, sliding glass doors leading to a wood deck out in the trees. But standing in front of the house now, the wood looked dull. Things seemed too still. I carried my bags inside. The door creaked wide, the smell of old pine and faint mildew rising. I flicked the overhead light, a single bare bulb over the entry hall, illuminating low walls, worn floors, small chipped chair beside a hall table. The heat system whirred faintly. Someone had clearly used the house recently. I placed my bag down in the corner and glanced at the dining area table. 4 chairs, a stack of newspapers from 2 weeks ago, and a note on lined card. It read, "Enjoy your stay. Treat the house gently." No signature. I shrugged and put the note in my pocket. I'd come to this place hoping to write. I carry a freelance writing job in New York, but the pace has been brutal. I needed space to breathe, to think. The listing had promised wooded serenity, starry nights, no internet, embrace the unplugged. I liked things unplugged. My phone still worked to call and text, but the Wi-Fi promised basic connection only. I'd told my editor I'd go offline, find inspiration. This place seemed perfect. The living room had a large stone fireplace, fire tools on one side, a stack of wood by the hearth. I chose the largest sofa, dropped into it, opened up the windows for forest air. The deck outside had 2 chairs and a small table. I made coffee in the kitchen. Filter, fresh grounds, poured the steam and took it out. Night fell quickly. The forest beyond the deck became a still blackness. I sat in the chair, sipping, listening to the hush. And then I heard the knock. Soft. Solid. I froze and looked at the sliding glass door. There was nothing visible. The blackness beyond the deck, 2 chairs, the table, tree branches slightly moving in the wind. I thought maybe a branch tapped the glass. I swallowed hard, stood up, went toward the door. I flipped the light on outside via a wall switch. The deck lit up pale yellow. Still nothing. I unlocked the door and cracked it open a little, looked out. The chairs, the table, the forest. No footprints in the dust of the deck. Nothing. I frowned. I closed the door, locked it again, and returned inside. I told myself I still had the coffee in the quiet and sat back. But I couldn't stop looking out the window. I drank slowly, heart pounding. The wind picked up a little. I could hear tree limbs creak. I told myself, it's nothing. That's just nature. Later, after dinner on the stovetop, a simple pasta and salad, I settled in near the fire. Logs crackled. I wrote a paragraph in my notebook. The words came slow but steady. Then I lost track of time. I remembered checking my phone, 10:47 p.m. The cell coverage was weak, but I had texted my editor, "Arrived safe. Will write, no distractions." I sat back again and thought, it's time for bed. I flicked off the lights, the house settling. In the darkness, I felt uneasy. I felt the weight of isolation. I climbed the stairs toward the bedroom. The house had a loft above. Bedroom up there, open railing that looked down into the living room, the forest visible past the deck lights through the big glass doors. The bed had thick blankets, a folded throw at the foot, small bedside lamp. I flicked the lamp, climbed in. Sleep came. Fitful. Then I woke up around midnight. Strange. The house was quiet, but something disturbed me. A faint shuffling noise at the edge of hearing, outside the deck. I held my breath. The deck lights were on. I rolled over, looked through the glass, darkness, tree shadows. Then I saw a form, a silhouette of a human figure, tall, standing near the edge of the lights, facing the forest, motionless. I froze. My heart slammed. The figure seemed too still, too statuesque. I waited. It stayed. I blinked. It moved. A slow, slight shift of weight from one leg to the other. It turned and looked toward the house. I gasped. The figure stepped forward, then back. The deck chair slightly rocked. I felt the floor beneath me not shake, but I knew someone was on the deck. I screamed softly. The figure tapped on the glass once. The headlights of the car didn't reach out here, so all I had was the deck light. I tried to reach for my phone on the nightstand. It was dead. Not just low signal, but actually shut off. I jerked out of bed, yanked on the blinds. The figure was gone. The deck was empty. I sprinted down the stairs, flipped on all the lights, not just the deck light, but the interior. I opened the door sliding wide, looked out, nothing but dark woods and the moon bent behind clouds. The chairs still slightly rocked. I couldn't tell if the wind had done that or something heavier. My breathing was loud. I locked the door firmly. I checked the windows, deadlocked. I closed the blinds and sat back on the sofa, shaking. My mind raced. I texted my editor, "Something's wrong." I quit writing. No answer. The rest of the night I stayed on the sofa, insisting I would not sleep upstairs. Lights on, fire burning. I watched the doorway leading to the deck, watched windows. I thought maybe I imagined it. Maybe a deer or tree shadow looked like a person. But it felt too human, too deliberate. Morning came weakly, fog creeping in among the pines. I didn't sleep. I made strong coffee and pretended breakfast would calm me. I walked outside into the deck area, feeling the chilly air. I found footprints in the soft gravel of the deck edge, bare human footprints. No shoes, just bare impressions in the dew-softened gravel. They led from one chair toward the far glass, stopping short. I crouched and touched one. It was fresh, not old, but maybe from last night. My mind shut. I stood and took a photo with my phone, which had regained enough battery and signal. Then I went upstairs, locked bedroom door, shut blinds. I called the host number listed in the booking. No answer. I left a voicemail. "I'm sorry, I found footprints. Someone came into the deck last night. Please respond." No response. The listing said 24-hour support, but I got nothing. I paced. I wrote in my notebook, "Don't panic." It might be someone who accidentally got locked out. It might be wildlife. But I couldn't shake it. I checked the house. No sign of forced entry into the sliding door. The deadlock was intact. The lock on the inside looked untouched. Yet someone had been on the deck. I moved the chairs a little further apart, placed one underneath the sliding door glass so I'd hear it move. I resumed my writing for a few hours. The day passed slowly. I avoided going far outdoors, preferring to stay inside, windows closed. That night I forced myself to sleep in the bedroom, though I kept the lights low and left the door open a crack so I could hear the living room. I set the chairs outside as I had earlier to block the sliding door and placed my phone on the nightstand with a flashlight app ready. Sleep came, fitful gratitude. At 3:16 a.m. I woke again. The house was dead silent. But then, a thump. The sound came from outside the glass doors. A slow, singular thud, like someone standing on the deck dropped a heavy object or one heavy foot planted. I sat upright, heart racing. My phone's flashlight was on. I jumped out of bed. I crept to the railing and looked down. The deck light was on. They automatically turn on at dusk and off at dawn, according to the exterior illumination sensor. Yet the deck was fully lit. And there, at the edge of the light, a figure, dressed dark, face masked by the shadows of the trees. Tall, broad shoulders. It held something in its hand, couldn't make out what. It turned slowly, looked at the glass like it was looking at me. Then it placed the object where the chairs were, something heavy. I couldn't see it completely. It knocked again, rapped on the glass with a kind of deliberate force. My scream came out before I could stop. The figure jerked its head toward me, as if it had heard the gasp. Then it dropped the object. It hit the floor, a hollow sound. Then the figure backed off the deck, disappeared into the forest. I ran down the stairs, dropped onto the sofa, shaking so violently that I couldn't write. My fingers pounded the notebook, but words made no sense. I tried calling 911, but signal was weak. The connection dropped. I tried again. Eventually, I reached a dispatch line in the local county. They heard me out, advised I lock myself in a safe place. I retreated to the bedroom, locked the door, barricaded it with a chair. I drew the blinds closed. I sat huddled beneath the blankets until dawn. In the morning, the object was there, a small metal box, maybe a foot long, lying on the deck's wooden planks, near where the chairs had stood. It was rusted or weather-worn. I opened it with gloves I found in a kitchen drawer, and inside were 4 old photographs. Black and white, each one showing the house, the same deck, but in older times. One shot of a family standing on the deck with parents and 2 children, another of just the children playing, another of the deck empty, but 2 chairs tipped over. The 4 photographs were cut, scratched, weather-marked. I flipped them over. They had no dates, no writing. I felt cold. I thought, why hide these here? Why place them overnight? I called the dispatch again, but their patrol car couldn't arrive quickly. Rural roads, detours, sleet predicted. They told me to stay inside, keep doors locked, consider leaving if possible. I contacted the listing host again. This time the number rang, but no one answered. I texted the message, "There's someone on the deck last night. I'm leaving." I got no response. I packed up, decided to leave that afternoon instead of staying the second night. I carried my things out, glanced at the house fondly and fearfully, that same stillness I first felt. I backed out the gravel drive and headed towards the highway. As I made the turn to leave, I looked in the rearview mirror. On the deck, I thought I saw a figure standing by the chair. I blinked. Gone. Later, back in my apartment in the city, I tried to figure what had happened. I searched the house listing again. I found it had changed names twice in the last year. The property tax records showed a previous owner who died of unknown causes 10 years ago. I searched local news. There was a small article from about 8 years ago about 2 children who vanished into the forest near that house. Investigation closed for lack of leads. Their footprints gone, nothing found. I didn't know if the family in the photo was them, but the link felt too strange. I couldn't stop the dreams. At night, I'd see the deck and the box and the figure in the woods. In the midnight dark, I'd wake, convinced I heard tapping, looking through my city apartment window at reflections of tree shadows as if they were on the deck. I started writing an article about my experience. The words poured out about fear, isolation, the unexpected vulnerability of a vacation rental in the woods. I sent it to my editor with full detail. Within weeks, the listing had been taken down from the rental website. I tried contacting the property management company. They said the owner asked for a temporary deactivation for renovations. I never stayed there again. I told myself it was a 1 in a million weird incident, but I now view unexpected noise at night differently. I'm alert when alone in a house I don't know. I learned that the promise of escape, unplugged, remote cabin, has a darker side when you have no neighbors, no one else around. That in the wood-shrouded peace, you become much more exposed. Occasionally, I wonder what the figure did with the box and why leave the photos. A message, a warning, a ritual? I'll never know. But every time I look at the photographs now, laminated copies I kept, they make me uncomfortable. The deck chairs are in the same orientation as the house I stayed in. The family looks at the camera, but the children's faces are blurred. Something is off. I feel it. And sometimes I still hear a soft knock when I'm alone in my apartment, tapping at the glass. I turn. Nothing outside, the city lights blur, but the memory of that deck, that figure, that box, still there. Story the end. The air was thick with humidity the night we arrived in the small Georgia town. My girlfriend Emma and I had driven down from Atlanta for a weekend getaway. The plan was simple: escape the city, find a quiet place, relax, and maybe do a bit of hiking. Emma had found the Airbnb online. It was a charming old farmhouse on the edge of a forest, a place that promised peace and isolation. Pictures showed a white clapboard house with green shutters, a wraparound porch, and rocking chairs that begged for late-night conversations with a glass of wine. The reviews were glowing, though sparse, only a dozen or so, but that was part of the appeal. Not many people knew about it. Not many people ventured that far back from the main road. The host, a woman named Marlene, met us at the house. She was older, maybe in her late 60s, with wispy gray hair tied in a bun and wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. She smiled, but there was something off about it, a stiffness that made me feel slightly uneasy, though I couldn't tell why. She gave us a quick tour, showing us the kitchen, living room, and the 2 bedrooms upstairs. She pointed out the fireplace and the old wood stove, explaining that they didn't often use the heating system, preferring the charm of firewood. Everything seemed normal, and the house smelled faintly of cedar and something floral, maybe a room freshener or a lingering scent from Marlene herself. We settled in quickly, unpacking our bags and lighting the fire in the living room. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, but there were no other sounds. It felt like we were alone in the world. After a simple dinner, we went to bed early. The bedrooms were on the 2nd floor, and the stairs creaked in that comforting old house way. Emma fell asleep almost immediately, but I lay awake for a while, listening to the house settle, the wind, and a faint scratching noise that I couldn't place. It started the next night. We were sitting on the porch, sipping wine, when I noticed something moving in the edge of the woods, a shadow, darting between the trees. Emma laughed it off, saying it was probably a deer or a raccoon. I nodded, but my gut tightened. Later, when we went to bed, I swore I heard footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. I told myself it was Marlene checking in, maybe, though she hadn't said anything about visiting. The footsteps stopped abruptly, then the house was silent again. By the third night, the small oddities had escalated. Doors we were certain we'd locked were ajar. Our luggage seemed moved slightly from where we left it. At first, we blamed ourselves. Maybe we'd forgotten to close the closet all the way, or knocked a suitcase while getting clothes. But the feeling of being watched was growing, pressing against the edges of my mind. One afternoon, we decided to explore the surrounding area. There was a trail behind the house, winding through dense forest. It looked peaceful, though the thick canopy blocked most of the sunlight. As we walked, Emma joked about how perfect this place would be for a horror movie setting. I laughed nervously, scanning the trees. There was a small clearing about half a mile in, and we stopped there to rest. That's when I noticed them. Footprints, deeply impressed into the soft soil, leading away from the clearing toward the house. They weren't deer prints. They were too large, too flat, human-like. And the pace was uneven, like someone was dragging their feet. I showed them to Emma, and her smile faltered. We decided not to mention it to Marlene. She seemed harmless enough, and who would believe us anyway? The next evening, things took a darker turn. Emma and I were asleep when we were both jolted awake by a loud bang downstairs. The sound of shattering glass followed. I grabbed the baseball bat we'd brought just in case, and we crept down the stairs. The kitchen was empty. No broken glass, nothing out of place except the back door, which was slightly open. I was sure I'd locked it. Heart pounding, I shut the door, bolted it, and checked every window. All locked. I convinced myself it was the wind, but Emma's eyes were wide with fear. That night, I slept with the bedroom door locked, listening to every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of wind, and the faintest scratching sound again. It seemed to be coming from the attic. The next morning, we considered leaving, but our phones had no signal. We joked nervously about being trapped in a horror story, but the laughter was hollow. When we mentioned the noises to Marlene later, she smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Old houses make noises," she said. "They settle. They talk. You'll get used to it." She didn't offer any explanation about the back door. The fourth night was the worst. I woke to Emma shaking me. She whispered that someone was in the house. I grabbed the bat again. We heard footsteps upstairs, slow and careful, like someone was testing the floorboards to avoid making too much noise. My stomach twisted. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly opened the bedroom door. Silence. Nothing. We could see the faint outline of the hallway leading to the stairs. Then, a shadow moved at the end of the hall. I froze. The shadow didn't belong to Marlene. Her visit would have been announced, and she hadn't come inside in days. The figure seemed hunched, moving almost like it was dragging itself along the floor. I swung the bat, calling Emma to stay behind me. The shadow disappeared before it reached the stairs, and a cold draft swept through the hallway. We ran out to the car, but the keys were gone. I searched frantically while Emma called Marlene on the landline. The line was dead. Panic began to set in. That's when we heard her voice behind us, faint, almost casual, coming from the living room. "You shouldn't leave," she said. We spun around. Marlene was standing there, holding a candle. Her smile was sharp, teeth catching the candlelight. "Why?" I asked, voice cracking. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away, as if beckoning us to follow. Something in her movement was unnatural, too fluid, too deliberate. We didn't follow. Instead, we ran upstairs, locked ourselves in the bedroom, and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, we knew we had to escape. We packed our bags quickly, checking every corner of the house. That's when we saw it. The attic ladder extended, and the door slightly open. Emma insisted we look inside before leaving, but I refused. I had the distinct feeling that whatever was up there wasn't human. The scratches on the floorboards in the hallway had become deeper, more numerous. Our luggage had been opened. Notes, written in what looked like red ink, were scattered across the living room table. They said things like, "Stay forever," and "Don't leave." Finally, we managed to pry open a side window and climb out, cutting ourselves on the old wood trim. We ran to the road, desperate for any passing car. After 20 minutes, a pickup truck appeared. We flagged it down, explaining quickly that we'd been trapped and that someone, maybe the host, was trying to keep us there. The driver, an older man, nodded solemnly and took us to the nearest gas station. When we called the police later, they went back to the property, but Marlene and the farmhouse were gone. Not just empty. The land was overgrown, no sign that a house had been there for decades. The gas station attendant told us that the area had been abandoned for years after a series of disappearances in the 1970s. Some locals claimed that the last residents had vanished without a trace. No official records confirmed this, but every description matched Marlene and the farmhouse exactly. We never found our belongings, and all attempts to trace the Airbnb listing online led to dead ends. The photos we had saved didn't exist anywhere but our devices. Friends who looked up the address found nothing but forest. The memories of that weekend linger like a shadow, and the sounds, the scratching, the footsteps, the faint whispers, sometimes invade our dreams even now. It's been 5 years, and Emma and I have never returned to Georgia. We sometimes talk about what really happened. Was Marlene a ghost, a human, something in between? And the house, was it real, or did we stumble into something else entirely? A place that exists out of time, feeding on curiosity and fear? We'll never know, but we do know one thing. Some Airbnb rentals are advertised as charming escapes, but the charm can hide something older, hungrier, and far more dangerous than we could have imagined. Story, the end. I drove into the driveway of the rental house in the middle of rural Pennsylvania around dusk. The heavy August air wrapped thickly around the car as I turned off the engine. A crooked mailbox at the road bore the name of the property the listing had used. Something unassuming like Maplewood Cottage. But as I stepped out of the car, I noticed the tall maples overhead casting long shadows. The house was older than the photos suggested. A 2-story white clapboard building with an enclosed veranda, a sagging roof, and a faint smell of damp straw and old wood drifting from the shaded lawn. I grabbed my bags from the back seat and pulled the front door key from the envelope the host had left on the kitchen table through their remote check-in instructions. Inside, the house felt quiet and still, more still than I expected. I dropped my bag on the floor of the small foyer and flipped on the lights. They buzzed softly, and I could hear the hum of the air conditioner through the vents, despite there being no daylight left. The living room was sparsely furnished with mission-style furniture and a heavy Persian rug that felt thick under bare feet. I went straight to the kitchen where the host had written that everything I might need, coffee, basic cooking utensils, linens, was available. The cabinets smelled lightly of pine cleaner, and there were fresh towels neatly folded on a rack. I felt comfortable, relieved to have arrived. I poured myself a small glass of wine and sat on the porch facing the lawn. The dusk light faded and the maples whispered with the breeze. The house creaked and settled. Somewhere inside, a floorboard squeaked, and I told myself I was imagining it. I'd taken a long drive up from the city for a quiet weekend away from work. It felt like it was going well. After dinner, I turned on the television, flipped through a few channels, then turned it off. The stillness returned. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, where the listing had described 2 bedrooms and a small bathroom. My suitcase sat in the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, the one at the front of the house with 2 windows that overlooked the gravel driveway. I changed into pajamas and slid into bed. The sheets smelled clean but old linen fresh, and I plugged in my phone charger on the side table. It was about 11 p.m. when I heard it, the sound of footsteps downstairs. I froze. The sound came in a light shuffle, barely audible over the air conditioner. I held my breath and listened. The sound stopped. I waited 5 minutes and heard nothing more. My heart pounded. After a moment, I told myself it must be the house settling, the old wood contracting in the cool night air. I rolled over and tried to sleep. At around 1 a.m., I woke to the feeling that something was watching. I kept a lamp turned on at the foot of the bed. The room seemed to glow dimly in the early morning darkness, but the air felt charged. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I raised myself on one arm and glanced at the door. It was slightly ajar. I had closed it when I went to bed. Did I leave it open? I swung my legs to the floor and stood, pulling on a light robe. I walked to the door and quietly pushed it shut, then leaned against it. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. This time it was upstairs, in the guest bedroom that I wasn't using, across the hallway. The sound of a heel or maybe a hard-soled shoe tapping lightly, then sliding across the wooden floor. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself it was dream logic. I went back and sat on the bed, pulled the covers up to my chin, and didn't move for the rest of the night. Morning came with a pale gray light through the windows. I made coffee and walked into the living room. I noticed something odd. Near the baseboard of the wall opposite the porch door, there were a few fresh scuff marks in the painted wood, small dark red smears that looked like dried blood. My stomach dropped. I knelt, stared at them, and traced them with my fingertip. The texture was sticky. How had I not seen them the night before? I wiped one away with a paper towel from the kitchen and watched the rag go pink. I realized I needed to leave. It didn't feel safe, but I told myself I should stay and check with the host if it was something I misinterpreted. I found the listing email on the kitchen table and sent a message. Hi, I noticed some red stains in the living room. Are these from previous guests? Just curious. I waited. No reply. I spent most of the morning pacing the house, checking the closets, the basement door, which was locked, listing said for remodeling. I glanced out the living room windows. The maples swayed, the lawn untouched, the gravel driveway empty. I decided to go for a walk. As I locked the front door, I glanced up at the roofline. A long gutter bent down near the middle, as if someone had leaned over it. My mind replayed the crawl of footsteps, the blood stains. Probably nothing, I told myself. Keep calm. I walked down the long driveway to the road. After about half an hour, I returned, feeling a little better. I sat on the porch and watched the shadows lengthen. When night came again, I tried to sleep early, but the noises returned, tapping in the living room, a soft, dragging sound. This time I heard a whisper, low and indistinct, like someone waking from a dream, although I cannot swear I heard actual words. I pulled the bed covers over my head. I didn't sleep well. At around 2 a.m., I woke to the abrupt sound of the doorknob downstairs turning. My body froze. I listened as the latch clicked. A heavy door, the back door that led to a tiny side porch, creaked inward. My heart slammed and my vision tunneled. I didn't move. Seconds later, I heard the slow footsteps across the floorboards, directly below me. My bedroom was on the second floor, hall across from the guest room and above the living room. The footsteps moved to the living room. I didn't know what to do. I sat very still, phone in hand, but I didn't dare call anyone. I told myself they were a trespasser. I envisioned them coming up the stairs. I held my breath, squeezed the phone tight, and then heard the steps stop. Then they retraced back. The latch clicked again as the door closed. The silence returned. The house felt empty, but suffocated. At dawn, I packed my bags. I left a note on the kitchen table. I'm sorry, but I'm checking out early. There was unauthorized entry last night, and I'm not staying. I walked to my car, heart pounding, and left without looking back. I drove for about an hour, the highway monotonous. I tried to reassure myself it was nothing. Maybe the wind knocked something. Maybe I was imagining. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting headlights behind me, but there were none. Later that afternoon, curiosity pulled me to message the host again. Just wanted to inform you that I left early due to security concerns. Please refund me accordingly. The host replied quickly, I'm sorry you felt unsafe. Please send the checkout photo and I'll see about a partial refund. I sent. Then I asked, any idea about the stains I saw and how someone might have entered the back door? The host's reply came, no one else had booked during your stay. The door is used by the cleaning crew between bookings, but we had none scheduled. I'll have a maintenance look tomorrow. My mind spun. That meant someone without authorization. That night, I ordered a motel 20 miles away and tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling someone might still be near the property. They could have watched me leave. 2 weeks later, I returned to the listing page and found it marked as inactive. The listing description had been removed and replaced with a note. This property is not available at this time. I wondered why. I found the host's name and searched for reviews on a local forum. I discovered someone else mentioned the same house had been booked a few weeks before me, and they reported disorientation, lost items, and weird noises at night. The comments were vague but consistent. Don't stay after dark. Was woken by someone standing by the door. Saw shadows in the window. My heart sank. I decided to go back to the property 6 weeks later, under daylight and with a friend, just to be sure. We approached the driveway. The house looked the same from the outside. We walked up to the porch. I tried the front door, unlocked. The key I had used earlier still worked. Inside, the same heavy hush. The living room still carried the smell of old wood and slightly damp air. We inspected the baseboard. The red smears had been wiped clean, but the wall still carried small dark marks. My friend pressed against it and found it sticky. We checked the back porch door. No new scratches on the latch, but the hinge side looked worn, like someone forced it open recently. We went upstairs. The guest room across the hall where I had heard footsteps, its floorboards had slight gouges near the windowsill. The window overlooked the side yard. I noticed the side yard grass was overgrown, crates and old lawn chairs stacked half hidden. In the attic hatch above the guest room's closet, we found the hatch security screws had been removed, barely secured, and the wood around it was slightly splintered. My breath caught. Whoever had entered might have used the attic to access the floor above. Then I found it. A small camera lens tucked behind a board in the attic crawl space facing the guest room window. The lens was tiny, no obvious wires visible. It might have been battery-powered or piggybacked off the house wiring. I shivered. We documented everything with photos. I messaged the host. We found a hidden camera in the attic, aimed at one of the bedrooms. Please refund me fully and inform me what you intend to do with this property. The host did not reply. I contacted the booking platform support and reported the listing. The platform removed the listing entirely and told me they were investigating. I discovered from public records the house had changed ownership 3 times in the past 2 years, each time under slightly different names. Previous listing photos were identical, but the titles and hosts changed. I suspected the property had been used discreetly for surveillance of guests, or worse, and the bloodstains I saw were not wine or paint. Weeks later, I received an email. The platform closed the investigation, couldn't confirm anything about the camera or entry. They refunded half my stay and offered credit for future booking, but said they couldn't guarantee the host would be banned. I never returned, and I never booked anything remotely similar in a rural location again. Occasionally, I checked the property's tax records and zoning office. The house still sits, still empty, awaiting the next guest. To this day, when I sit in the dark, I think of those footsteps downstairs, of the quiet latch turning, of the camera lens in the attic. I think of the fragile safety we assume when we book into a home away from home, and how it can be violated in one instant. I wonder what I missed in the night. I wonder who watched. I wonder if they came back after I left, walked through the same house, and found what I discovered. Story the end. I arrived at the house just as the sky was slipping into dusk. The rental was farther off the beaten path than I'd expected. It sat among tall pines and elms, a narrow, winding drive that descended steeply from the main road. In the car, the only voice on the radio had been static and distant warbling. No welcome music, no traffic updates. I rolled into the gravel lot, the tires crunching under my seat as I shut off the engine. My heart felt oddly heavier than I'd thought possible on a move-in day. The house was 2 stories, all dark gray wood and broad porches, its windows black and reflective like just faintly sleeping eyes. There was a soft hum of insects, the chirr of crickets beginning their chorus. No lights on inside yet. I unlocked the front door. It clicked softly, and the wood smell of the open door rose up. The air inside was cooler than outside, stale in the way that a place left alone for a little while becomes stale. I moved my suitcase in and flicked the hall light on. This was my escape. A quiet week away from the city, far from the humming office, the daily clutter of email and calls. I'd booked the place through Airbnb because it looked cozy in photos. A stone fireplace, a wide kitchen island, like something out of a mountain magazine. The host's listing said secluded, peaceful, immersed in nature. All true, just more isolated than I'd thought. I dropped my bag by the staircase and began unpacking. As the evening grew darker, I turned on a few lamps, soft, warm light spilling into the corners. I made myself a drink, sat by the fireplace, and let the quiet settle into me. Across one wall, there was a big sliding glass door leading to the deck. Beyond it, the silhouette of trees pressed in. I laughed softly to myself. The isolation felt luxurious. But later, as I walked into the bathroom to take a shower, I noticed the hair on the floor near the drain. Not mine. I'd already shaved that morning. The hair was longer, coarse, slightly dark, with a curling tip. I paused, feeling a prick of unease. The drain itself looked fine. The shower curtain fresh. I didn't raise it with the host immediately. I convinced myself it must have been left by a previous guest and the cleaning service missed it. Still, I tucked it away in the back of my mind. That night I slept restlessly. The woods cradled the house in complete darkness. When I opened my eyes, I could see nothing beyond the window other than raw black. Many small sounds, twigs snapping far off, the slow sigh of wind through branches. I kept checking the clock. 2:17 a.m., 3:04 a.m., 4:22 a.m. At one point, I thought I heard a soft creak from the hallway outside my bedroom, like the floorboards shifting under someone's weight. I stayed still, heart thudding, listening, imagining footsteps. But nothing came. The next morning I made breakfast, the sun filtering weakly through the trees. It felt safer in daylight. I decided to go for a hike along a trail the host had mentioned. The map he sent showed one trail heading out behind the house, wrapping around a creek and into the woods. Off I went, boots on, water bottle, camera. I walked about 40 minutes in, the forest alive and quietly beautiful. Birds calling, shafts of golden light through leaves. Then I paused by the creek, sat on a rock, sipped water. I looked at the house in the distance, small and far away. On my way back, I sensed I was being watched. The forest didn't feel comfortable anymore, too quiet. I turned once and saw something move among the trees, nothing distinct, just shifting shadows. I quickened my pace. When I reached the clearing for the house, I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing deep. That afternoon, I decided to explore inside the house more thoroughly, find any quirks, get comfortable. The second floor had 2 bedrooms and a little loft space with a rocking chair. The loft overlooked the living room. The railing was wood, worn smooth. Near the chair, I found a journal on a small side table. Odd, because the listing said nothing about leaving journals for guests. The cover was blank. I opened it. Inside, there were a few entries, scrawled in different handwritings. The earliest was dated nearly 2 years earlier. Open quote, "Stayed here for the first time. It's peaceful. Woods quiet. I feel safe." Close quote. The next entry, open quote, "There's something outside at night. I hear scratches on the windows, but no animals appear. The windows are shut." Close quote. And then another, open quote, "Last night I thought I saw someone in the trees. I don't know if it was my mind. I'm leaving early." Close quote. The final entry was undated, small script. Open quote, "I shouldn't have come back." Close quote. My scalp tingled. The entries weren't signed. Someone had left this behind on purpose. Did the host know? I closed it quickly and slid it back. I didn't call the host yet. I told myself nothing major had happened. Maybe it was just an old guest venting. But I felt an undercurrent of something. I went downstairs trying to shake it off. Later that evening, I prepared a simple pasta dinner. The fireplace crackled. I sat down to watch a movie on my laptop. Around 9:30 p.m., I heard it. A sharp tap on the living room window, like someone's knuckle against glass. I froze. The sliding glass door to the deck was closed and locked. The curtains hung still. I switched off the movie, stared at the pane. Nothing outside. The night was thick. I felt a shiver. I told myself maybe a branch hit the window. I got up, walked out to the deck with a flashlight. The wood planks soaked darkness. I swept the flashlight around. Nothing. No sign of animals. No footprints in the dust on the chair. Nothing disturbed. I returned inside, locked the door, double-checked windows, made tea, tried to relax. I fell asleep eventually, though lightly this time. At around 3 a.m., I jolted awake hearing what sounded like soft humming, far off, outside, like wind through metal pipes, but rhythmic. I lay still, unwilling to open my eyes. The sound continued, maybe 2 minutes, then faded. Morning came. The sun was pale. I felt unsettled. I brewed coffee and resolved to text the host about the journal and the taps. I typed a polite message, "Hi," Just a question. There was a journal left on the side table in the loft, and I found some hairs in the bathroom drain. Are these things usual? Thanks. No response for most of the day. I walked to the local small town a few miles away for groceries, tried to get back in routine. That evening, I invited another guest, a friend from college who lived nearby, to come stay the night. I thought having company would turn this into a fun memory instead of creepy. She arrived around 7 p.m. We made dinner, chatted, drank wine, laughed. We stayed in the living room. After about 3 glasses, we stepped out onto the deck for a moment to look at the stars. The sky was clear. We heard a branch crack in the darkness beyond the deck. Probably a deer, she said. I smiled weakly. Back inside, after my friend went to bed upstairs, I stayed up a little longer in the living room. I felt a sudden chill. The air by the fireplace was cooler than just minutes before. I heard footsteps above me, slow, deliberate. Someone walking across the loft floor. But only I was staying down here. I froze, listened. The footfalls paused, then another. I tried calling out, "Hey!" but the word died in my throat. I climbed the stairs softly, heart pounding. At the top of the stairs, I peered into the duvet of my friend's room. She was sound asleep, only quiet. I drifted into her room, checked that the door was locked. Yes. Then I checked the loft area. Nothing. No one sitting in the rocking chair. The journal still on the side table. I exhaled and returned downstairs, chalking it up to imagination and the wine. At midnight, I led my friend downstairs for tea. As we entered the living room, the sliding glass door was wide open, the lock thrown back. I turned sharply to her. "We locked this," I said, voice brittle. We looked at each other. She shook her head, puzzled, sleepy. I closed it and locked it again. We sat, whole bodies tense. "Maybe I left it open," I said. My voice sounded like someone else's. She hugged herself. We decided to call it a night. I returned upstairs to my room and lay in bed, eyes wide, listening. Outside, the wind rose. The tree branches skittered across the deck glass door. Something unlike any normal branch scratched sharply one time, then paused, then scraped again. I recognized the sound, fingernails dragging on wood. It moved to the other side of the deck. I bolted upright in bed, heart thudding. I didn't move. The sound stopped. I held my breath until the squeaking floorboards of the deck told me someone walked off. Then silence. I don't know how long I lay there before sleep reclaimed me. Morning came and everything seemed normal, but I woke with a sense of dread. In the bathroom, I looked again at the drain. There were more hairs, longer, thicker. I pulled them out, dark, frayed, coarse. I held them up in the light. I sent another message to the host. Important, the door was open last night. Also hair again in the drain. I'm going out now. Still no reply. I packed as if I was leaving early. I booked a hotel just in case. I decided to stay for one more night, but would check out in the morning. I told my friend this while we ate lunch. She agreed. It was eerie. We should leave. She left around 4 p.m., giving me her number and saying to text when I got home. I felt relief seeing her headlights drive down the driveway. By early evening, I was alone again. I set up a simple meal and sat at the kitchen island, looking at the windows out to the deck. Something had shifted. The deck chair was rotated slightly, a quarter turn, although earlier leaning perfectly against the railing. I frowned. I pushed it back into place. My mind raced. Was I imagining this or was someone here? At 8 p.m., I started watching a show. Suddenly the lights flickered, then went out. The living room light, the kitchen lights, black. The only illumination came from the fireplace glow and a faint orange light from outside, like a solitary distant street lamp deep in the forest. I sat perfectly still. I reached for my phone, no signal, 0 bars. I thought to call the host, dead. I considered leaving right then, but darkness, stairs, reaching for the doorknob in pitch black. My head was spinning. I took a breath and told myself I'd just wait 5 minutes. I found a flashlight in a drawer. I used it to get down into the basement level. There was a small storage area there. I fetched a heavy butter knife from a utensil drawer, then locked the kitchen door, pulled the stay bar across it. I locked all downstairs windows. I sat on the couch, blinked into the shadows. At about 9:15 p.m., I heard the front door latch move. I jumped from the couch, knife in hand, tip pointing toward the door. The front door knob turned slowly. I held my breath. The door stayed shut. Something heavy pushed from the outside. The wood groaned under pressure. I stood frozen. After maybe 10 seconds, the pressure stopped. The knob clicked back. I didn't move. I wished I'd never come alone here. I called 911 but had no cell service inside the house. I ran out to the porch, stood under the sky, phone up, but still swirling bars. I braced myself and shouted for help anyway. The forest swallowed my voice. I sat back inside, shaking. I kept the knife in front of me like a sentinel overnight. At dawn, I awoke, exhausted. The front door came unlocked, bar moved. The deck chair was now facing outward. Limbs of broken sticks lay across the chair. I checked every window, none pried open, no footprints in the dust. I snapped a photo of the door and the sticks on the chair, then sent it to the host. Open quote, someone broke in last night. I feel unsafe. Please respond. Close quote, the host responded almost instantly. I'm sorry you're having issues. I'll send someone right away. Relief flooded me. Within the hour, maybe 2 hours later, an older man I assumed to be the host's maintenance guy arrived. He introduced himself as Mike. He asked if I'd like to stay or leave. I said I'd like to leave. He helped carry my luggage outside, and I mounted my rental car and left. I didn't look back at the house. I got home safely and slept for hours. After waking, I called the host to request a full refund. He apologized and said we'll talk tomorrow. But he sounded odd, too calm, as though this kind of thing happens. I asked, who is the journal from? Why were hairs in the drain? He hesitated. We've had guests leave things behind. Cleaning staff do their best. Very rare break-ins, but you did the right thing leaving early. I asked if the house was ever broken into before. He said, not major. Just animals, maybe a deer or raccoon on the deck. Everything's fine now. Unable to sleep, I Googled the address and found an article in a small local paper from 5 years ago. A young woman had rented the same house. She left after saying she heard voices in the night, someone upstairs walking. She soon thereafter filed a missing persons report, but she was found days later, shaken in the woods a mile away, refusing to talk about what happened. No follow-up. I cross-checked. The listing changed names, the host changed company, but the address remained. The journal matched the timeline, roughly. I reported the incident to Airbnb. They asked for logs, screenshots, photographs. I provided them. They said they would review. I still get nervous when I think of the place, even though I'm miles away in my city apartment. I replay every moment. The hair, the tapping window, the voice in the dark, the unlocked door, the journal, and its cryptic warnings. It wasn't obvious where the threat came from. I never saw someone hide in the house. Maybe the house was targeted by someone who knew about its isolation, or maybe someone had simply been monitoring it. Whatever the case, the night revealed that being alone in a rental in the woods is different. The forest has ears, and something walked on that deck. Every time I travel, I check reviews, cross-reference addresses, call ahead. I still glance at vacation rental listings with suspicion now. That week felt like a test or an initiation. I told my friend about the missing person article. She asked whether I'd ever go back. I said no. I asked the host if the rental would continue. He said yes, after some upgrades. I still sometimes imagine I left something behind in that house, something I missed. Possibly a small camera, perhaps one of my earrings. I've wondered if someone else moved in and found the journal or the hair and left more entries. I don't know. What I do know is that I walked away and carried something more than my suitcase. The knowledge that solitude, when too quiet, isn't always safe. And sometimes when I wake late at night, I imagine hearing footsteps upstairs or a tap at my own window. I'll breathe deeply and remind myself I'm safe now. Story the end. The summer of 2018 was supposed to be my girlfriend's and my break from the constant grind of our lives in Chicago. We'd been working nonstop for months, her in the hospital, me in IT, and we desperately needed a few days away from the city's noise, from the people, from everything. After scouring through countless Airbnb listings, we found a small cabin in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia. It looked rustic but charming in the photos, far enough from the nearest town to feel isolated without being unsafe. Or so we thought. The host, a woman named Marlene, had glowing reviews, and the listing promised a peaceful retreat surrounded by nature. We booked it without hesitation. Driving into the mountains that Friday evening, we noticed the air getting colder and denser. The winding roads felt narrower than they had appeared on Google Maps, and our GPS seemed to glitch, rerouting us repeatedly. I brushed it off, attributing it to the terrain. As night began to fall, the trees pressed in closer, their silhouettes jagged and looming against the fading light. Finally, we turned down a barely paved driveway and saw the cabin. It was smaller than the photos suggested, but it had a warm, inviting glow from the windows. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney, and a welcoming porch light flickered. We rang the doorbell. No answer. I tried the key lockbox, and the code worked. The door creaked open, releasing a musty, woodsy smell. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of old pine and something else, something metallic. The furniture was minimal. A couch, a small dining table, 2 chairs, a kitchenette, and 2 bedrooms. The walls were lined with old photographs of the surrounding mountains, sepia-toned and curling at the edges. We shrugged off the weird smell and settled in, unpacking our bags. By 10 p.m., we were ready to relax. I turned on the small television, but it only picked up static. My girlfriend, Emily, laughed nervously. "Of course it doesn't work," she said. "It's an old cabin." We made a fire in the fireplace, the crackling sound filling the room, and tried to enjoy the silence of the forest outside. The first night was mostly uneventful, although I could swear I heard footsteps outside the cabin around 2 a.m. I convinced myself it was an animal and tried to sleep. Emily didn't wake up, and neither did I. The next morning, we explored the surrounding area. The cabin sat on a small rise overlooking a dense valley, the forest spreading in every direction. We found a trail and decided to hike, hoping to clear our minds. As we walked, we noticed old stone markers hidden among the trees. They were uneven, worn, and some had faint etchings. Emily joked, "Maybe it's some kind of old cemetery." I wasn't so sure. The forest felt thick, like it was pressing in on us. Birds were silent. Even the wind seemed hesitant. We turned back to the cabin around midday. That night, as we ate a simple dinner, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were louder, deliberate, circling the cabin. I walked to the window, but didn't see anything in the darkness. Emily noticed my unease. "It's just raccoons or deer," she said, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On our third day, things escalated. I was sitting on the porch, writing notes in a travel journal, when I saw something moving at the edge of the trees, a shadow that didn't belong to any animal I recognized. It was tall and hunched, moving almost silently. When I pointed it out to Emily, she said she didn't see anything. I tried to laugh it off, but a knot formed in my stomach. Later, we decided to check the attic. The cabin had a ladder leading up to a small, dusty space with a single, grimy window. In the corner, stacked haphazardly, were boxes filled with what looked like old clothing, newspapers, and, strangely, jars filled with dried herbs and small bones. My heart raced. I showed Emily. She looked pale, but insisted we leave everything alone. We didn't speak about it for the rest of the day. That night, around 1 a.m., the power went out. The cabin was plunged into darkness. We lit candles, but the flickering flames only made the shadows in the corners deeper and more sinister. That's when we heard it. A low, rasping whispering from outside. We couldn't make out the words, just the sound of someone or something speaking in a tone that was almost human, but not quite. The whispering grew closer. We could hear the scraping of nails or claws against the wooden walls. Emily grabbed my hand, panic in her eyes. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and shone it outside. At first, there was nothing. Then, at the edge of the tree line, I saw a figure crouched low, motionless, watching us. It was too dark to make out details, but the shape was wrong. Too elongated, too thin, and its movements quick, jerky, unnatural, made me recoil. I slammed the door shut and locked it. We spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, too scared to sleep. Every so often there was a tap at the windows or the porch. The whispering continued, fading in and out. I wanted to call for help, but the cell service was non-existent. Emily suggested we leave at first light, but I was too scared to drive in the dark, and besides, the figure seemed to patrol the driveway like a predator. The next morning, we packed everything frantically and tried to leave. As we drove down the narrow driveway, I looked back and saw several figures in the forest, their heads turning in unison to follow us. They didn't run, didn't chase, just watched. It was the last image I wanted to remember, but it was seared into my mind. We made it back to the main road and finally got cell service. I called Airbnb to report the cabin and explain why we had to leave. The representative listened politely, but said The host had no other complaints and that the cabin was listed as secluded and private, which they assumed we understood. I tried to argue that there was something wrong, something unsafe, but there was no way to prove it. For months afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was following me. I had nightmares of the cabin, the whispering, the elongated figures in the trees. Emily refused to go back to any kind of forested retreat. Eventually, we moved to a different state, tried to start fresh. But even now, whenever I hear scratching at night or a whisper that seems out of place, I think about that cabin and the figures waiting in the trees. Months later, out of curiosity and maybe foolishness, I tried to find that cabin again. It had vanished from Airbnb. Even the address I had no longer existed on any map. It was as if it had never been there. I checked online forums, local news, anywhere I could think of. No one else had reported a missing cabin or strange disappearances in that area. Sometimes when Emily and I talk about it, she wonders if it was all in our heads. Stress, isolation, exhaustion. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And late at night, when the wind is just right and the shadows fall at a certain angle, I still feel those eyes on me, watching from somewhere in the forest. A year after the incident, I received a strange package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small jar, identical to the ones in the attic, filled with tiny bones and a note that read, "Don't forget us." I immediately threw it away, but the fear didn't leave me. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle in the bushes, feels like a reminder that some things are patient and some things are waiting. I've told friends the story, but they think I'm exaggerating or just telling a creepy tale for effect. But anyone who's been truly alone in the wilderness with the wrong kind of quiet pressing in knows that some places aren't meant for humans. Some things hide in the woods, and if you get too close, they notice. To this day, I avoid secluded cabins, hotels, motels, anything with people nearby. The safety in numbers, the hum of civilization, it's comforting. But there are moments when I still dream about that cabin, the whispering and the figures that moved inhumanly through the trees. And when I wake up, I check the locks, the windows, and for a second I expect to see something crouched just outside, watching, waiting. Even writing this, I feel it. The hairs on my neck rising, the small chill crawling across my arms. The cabin wasn't just a place. It was a trap, a beacon, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary seeming vacation rentals can harbor the most extraordinary horrors. Emily refuses to talk about it now. She changes the subject whenever I bring it up, and I can't blame her. Some memories are better left unspoken, but the memory lingers. I still see the figures in my peripheral vision, in the dark corners of rooms in the forest near the highway. And sometimes when I drive past dense woods, I grip the steering wheel tighter, remembering the smell of that old cabin, the whispering and the metallic tang in the air that promised we were never truly alone. I learned something that summer, something I can't unlearn. Isolation is not peaceful, and the unknown is patient. And sometimes, when a listing promises secluded, private, and charming, it's only telling half the truth. The other half is waiting, watching, whispering. I haven't returned to the Appalachians since, and I doubt I ever will. But there are nights when the wind carries a faint whisper that sounds suspiciously like my name, and I remember that cabin, and I know that some things never forget. Story the end. I woke to the sound of heavy rain tapping the broad windows of the old Victorian house before I realized this had not been the quiet getaway I'd planned. I was in Kentucky, in the small town of Ashwood Falls, booked through Airbnb for a weekend escape from work. The listing had been perfect. 2-bedroom, 19th century charm, creaking floors, high ceilings, a wraparound porch. I arrived Friday evening just after dusk, the sky heavy and gray, the house looming at the end of a long gravel drive, trees bowed in the wind. I chatted with the host, a woman named Marlene, mid-50s, who lived just off-site in a converted carriage house behind the main house. She welcomed me, gave me the key, the padlock code, told me she would come by Sunday morning for checkout, and otherwise left me to my own devices. The house was cold inside. The previous occupants must have left the heat low. A single lamp glowed in the living room. I shrugged off the chill, poured myself a bourbon, and settled down by the fire. At first, everything seemed perfect. I made dinner in the kitchen, Pasta, wine, the kind of uncomplicated evening I wanted. Later, I wandered through the house, exploring the creaky stairs, the rooms with old wallpaper peeling at the edges, a trunk in one corner, a rocking chair in another. I found a handwritten guest book on the hall table, notes from other visitors, all praising the place. Nothing odd. Then I heard the noise. It was quiet at first, the kind of subtle, almost imperceptible scrape of wood on wood, like someone dragging a heavy chair across the floor. Then the faint hiss of air. I paused. The house was silent aside from the storm outside. I got up, walked into the corridor, could see the door to the guest room I'd booked slightly ajar. I closed it, returning to the living room quickly, convincing myself it was just the old house settling. I woke sometime after midnight to the glimmer of moonlight slicing through the curtains. The fire had died down, and the draught made the room feel like a refrigerator. I wrapped myself in a blanket and drifted back to half sleep when I heard it again. A quiet click, like a door being unlocked, followed by the floorboards upstairs creaking, very gently, deliberately. I held my breath. Maybe one of the windows caught a breeze, maybe a squirrel walked along the roof. But the sound came again, this time from the guest room I'd used Saturday night for my things, and I found myself wide awake. I got up, lamp in hand, and climbed the stairs quietly. The corridor was dark, the only light the moon and a small lamp at the end. I approached the door to my room. It was closed. I reached for the knob. Warm. I paused. Someone had touched it recently. The door swung inward slightly when I nudged it. My heart pounded. I stepped inside. My suitcase was exactly where I left it. Everything looked normal. But inside the narrow closet, something, had shifted the fold of my jacket so that the sleeve hung down differently than when I slept. I swear the coat stood out just a little more than it had hours earlier. I shook my head. Maybe I was imagining it. I went back downstairs. The wind rattled the panes. Water pounded on the porch. I closed the curtains, locked the front door, and sat back on the couch. It took me nearly an hour to return to some semblance of calm. Eventually, I got back into bed. When morning came, heavy clouds still hung low. I went for coffee, poured a mug in the kitchen, and heard the front door open quietly. I jumped. I didn't expect anyone. I left my drink on the counter and walked toward the living room. The door to the carriage house host space was closed, but I thought I heard someone moving in there. I knocked on the main front door anyway, just to check. No answer. I peeked outside. No one on the porch. No footprints in the gravel beyond mine. I blamed the storm, the creaks, the shadows. I told myself I would check in with Marlene later. Later that morning, I drove into town to get supplies, firewood, snacks, just general grocery stuff. On return, I saw Marlene's car in the driveway. She waved as I pulled in. I told her about hearing sounds, about the warm doorknob. She nodded slowly, furrowed her brow. "Old houses do weird things," she said. "Let me know if anything actually seems off." I left it at that. But all day I was on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. The windows looked out on wooded acreage and pasture beyond. Occasionally I'd catch movement, a dark form at the edge of the trees, maybe a deer, maybe something else. The breeze would lift the lace curtains so that for a moment I'd see a silhouette shifting. I convinced myself it was just natural. That evening, the power flickered. The storm was more severe. I had dinner early, didn't go out. I sat by the fire. I heard the sound again, very distinct now. Footsteps upstairs, slow and measured on the floorboards opposite my room. Then a soft, muffled thump, like something falling. I froze. The sound repeated. My pulse raced. I grabbed my phone and checked the time, 10:37 p.m. I texted Marlene, "I think someone's upstairs. Could you check?" She replied, "I'm out getting supplies. I'll be back later tonight. Lock the door if you like. Old house noises are likely." Her answer didn't reassure me. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, on the couch, laptop open but barely reading. At about midnight, I heard the back door slam. Not the front door, the back, the old wood door that led to the porch. I jumped. I felt paralyzed. I thought, either someone's here uninvited or the wind slipped it open. I didn't check immediately. I stayed put until the storm broke, listening to the wind howl and the rain lash the windows. At dawn, I made tea and walked out to the porch. The rain had eased. The porch was soggy, the woods slick. I leaned on the railing and looked toward the woods. In the distance, I saw something small, maybe bright-colored, among the tangle of trees. I squinted. It shifted, then vanished. I shook my head. Back inside, I noticed the guest room door ajar again. I felt sick. I felt sick. My suitcase was zipped shut as I left it, but the bedspread was not hanging symmetrically. I reached down and found a small folded piece of paper between the mattress and box spring, sticking halfway out. My heart stopped. I pulled it out. It was a slip of lined paper in messy handwriting. I see you. There was no signature. The paper was damp with moisture, the ink smudged. I dropped it. I stared at the ceiling. I wanted to laugh, cry, run. I locked myself in the bathroom for a while, phone in hand. I texted Marlene, "We need to talk when you get back." She responded, "Okay. Tomorrow afternoon?" My mind raced. I went over everything. How did someone get here? Did they live in the house? Was the host involved? Was I just paranoid? I tried to rationalize it. The guest book said no one else was staying this weekend. The driveway didn't show tire tracks other than mine. Yet, the back door slam. Footsteps. The note. I felt like I'd walked into someone else's reality. I opted to leave the house for the rest of the day. I drove to the nearby state park, forced myself through hikes, but every so often I checked my phone. In the evening, I didn't go inside the house until dusk faded. I got takeout from the local diner and ate it on the porch, watching shadows. The house's windows glowed softly behind me. The tree branches waved in the wind, occasional creaks, drips, sighs of old wood shifting. That night, I did something I rarely do. I slept with the lights on in the living room, blanket over me, phone flashlight ready. At 2:13 a.m., I woke to the front door opening. I heard the unlocking, the gentle jangle of metal. I wanted to scream, but didn't. I grabbed my phone, got up, reached for the door bracelet, then I heard a voice. A deep voice, low. I couldn't make out words, but there was speech. I froze, vision dark aside from the phone's glow. I crept toward the front hall. The voice stopped. I inched closer. The victim's fear, the adrenaline, I couldn't move. The front door clicked shut. I stood frozen in the dark. My phone flashlight showed the key in the lock turned inward. I backed out of the hall and into the living room, heart pounding, breath heaving. I called 911, moved cautiously into the kitchen, but when police arrived 5 minutes later, they found nothing. No forced entry, no sign of an intruder. The host arrived minutes after the police, apologetic. She said she'd been called away by a friend who'd had a car accident out of town, and she'd returned only a few minutes before the call. She insisted the house was safe and offered to let me stay somewhere else, her friend's cabin nearby, but I told her I couldn't. I asked to cancel the rest of my stay. She agreed, refunded the night, and said she'd clean everything and turn on an alarm system for future guests. I left that morning, suitcases packed. The host handed me keys to the cabin nearby for future guests, asked me to send a review of the house, and I did, polite but cautious. I didn't say much. I drove off, the trees and gravel road receding behind me. But the real shock came 2 weeks later. I received an email from Airbnb. Your host has submitted a damage claim for items lost moved during your stay. My stomach dropped. I checked my memory. I had carefully locked the doors. I had left nothing behind that wasn't mine. I responded, I left the house early due to safety concerns. Please cancel the claim. The host replied within minutes. She believed someone had broken in through the guest room window and asked if I'd stayed in a different bed that night. I replied no. I had stayed on the couch in the living room that second night. She insisted she found a pair of gloves under the couch cushions and one of her lawn golf trophies missing from a display case. I told Airbnb that I had no knowledge of these items. Airbnb closed the claim for lack of evidence, but the sense of violation that I might have been accused of theft haunted me. Weeks after, I tried to sleep. I changed my bedding twice. I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was watching. I looked around my own bedroom at home and felt creeped. I realized I'd developed a kind of hypervigilance. The noise of a wood floor anywhere would make me check corners, windows. The host apologized again, said she'd had someone stay after my canceled reservations, and discovered that the previous guest had a history of odd behavior. But she claimed she'd cleaned and installed new locks. I thanked her, but said I felt the house was no longer safe for me. I never returned. In fact, I never used Airbnb again without extra precautions. I bought a portable door alarm. I started sweeping rooms for hidden cameras. as one reviewer told of finding one inside a router at an Airbnb in another story. Bored Panda, I learned to check windows, locks, unfamiliar footprints, and most important, to trust that feeling in my gut when something felt off. Back in the old Victorian house, the story of what truly happened remains unresolved. I never discovered any evidence of trespass. No prints, no sign of forced entry, no motive. The note, "I see you," remains with me in memory. Months later, I asked the host if she'd had any other issues. She said yes. A previous guest had reported odd noises and footsteps too, but left early. She dismissed it as old house quirks at the time. She said she now keeps the basement locked, something she hadn't mentioned to me. I still wonder what or who was in that house with me. Was it a trespasser? Someone living in the walls? A previous guest? A stalker? Or simply my imagination stretched by isolation and storm? I'll never know, but I slept for weeks afterward with the lights on. The end story. The end.